So I think the way we can think of sustainable finance is a qualitative change, which when financing decisions are made, also include not only the economic return, but the social impact in terms of impact on people and also impact on environment. The philanthropic sector can come in and subsidize some of these returns so that it's not too burdensome on the micro enterprises. We can combine philanthropy and commercial sector and create synergies which can promote, I think, development and induce the commercial sector to go into sectors where they are not going because of their economic mindset.
Halo semua, bersama saya saat ini Wahyu Jatmiko. Saya adalah dosen dan juga peneliti di Fakultas Ekonomi dan Bisnis Universitas Indonesia. Pada kesempatan kali ini kita akan memiliki dua video akan membicarakan terkait dengan progress towards the SDGs and the accelerating role of Islamic finance. Bersama kita sudah ada seseorang yang sangat spesial dari United Kingdom, adalah Professor Habib Ahmed. So, mari kita simak videonya. Dua video ini akan sangat bermanfaat sekali untuk kita mengetahui bagaimana kemudian progres dari SDGs dan bagaimana Islamic finance itu memiliki role untuk accelerating SDGs. Right. Now, thank you very much, Professor Habib Ahmed, for being with us here. I know you are very busy with your schedule, and having you here in this podcast is very much a pleasure to us.
Thank you very much, and I also want to thank you actually to invite me here to come to your beautiful campus, and I really appreciate the hospitality, and it has been an honor to be here and meet people and see your beautiful campus.
Pleasure is ours, Prof. So yeah, could you please, open this podcast, tell us a little bit about yourself, how eventually you are being very important person in Islamic finance so far. You just got the IsDB Prize in Islamic finance related, because of your research in Islamic finance and economics. So, how is your journey towards this?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Actually, I have my university education in conventional economics. I did my master's in economics from university in Bangladesh, University of Chittagong. Then I went to Oslo, Norway, and have done another master's postgraduate degree from University of Oslo, again in economics. And actually it was during my studies in Oslo that I was in some ways introduced. I came across some reading of Professor Omar Chapra, Dr. Omar Chapra, towards a just monetary system. And it was that book which made me interested in Islamic economics. I continued with my PhD at the University of Connecticut in USA in monetary economics, and there was nothing Islamic until then. But I think that interest in Islamic economics was always there. Then as I started to work as an academic, I devoted some time to learn Islamic economics. And while looking at the literature, I found that Islamic Development Bank, their research and training wing, Islamic Research and Training Institute, they were in some ways producing a lot of literature on Islamic economics and finance, and I started reading them. And while reading them, I also applied for a job there. And I was lucky to be actually selected there to work for the institute. And I would say that my schooling in Islamic economics and finance was at that institute. I was very fortunate to be among the pioneers. The people who I was reading were actually working there. And I took the opportunity to learn as much as I could. I interacted with a lot of these very well-known Islamic economists who are considered pioneers. Other than Dr. Umar Chapra, Dr. Munzir Kaf was there, Dr. Fahim Khan, Dr. Munawar Iqbal, among others. And the other thing about living in Jeddah was the King Abdulaziz University is in Jeddah. And it has it has an Islamic Economic Center. So some of the scholars who are not in IRTI, they were actually in the center. So among others, Professor Najatullah Siddiqui was there, Dr. Anas Zarqa was there. So Alhamdulillah, I think my stay in Jeddah is where I have learned Islamic economics and finance. In terms of the research, I think one of the things which in some ways changed when I came to Islamic Development Bank, because Islamic Development Bank is a development bank which is responsible or assists its member countries to basically promote economic development. So we were in some ways not required, but our research was expected to be applied so that it would benefit the countries. So I think that is another, in some ways, qualitative change in my research. Other than coming into Islamic economics, my research moved from theoretical and purely more empirical to more applied research, which had some policy implications.
Right, interesting, very interesting. You mentioned a lot about the, the founding fathers of Islamic economics and finance, basically, right? So, then you moved to Durham after that. I mean, why Durham? I mean, in Indonesia, when you say the Islamic economics, Islamic finance, we always think about the Middle East, right? Then why go to the UK?
Yes, that's an interesting thing. Actually, when I was in Jeddah, I worked for Islamic Development Bank for, I think, 8 years. That I had a very steep learning curve. As I said, I was with the pioneers of Islamic economics finance. They were my teachers and mentors. Then I got an opportunity while I was in Jeddah to actually work for a commercial bank, the largest commercial bank in Saudi Arabia. They were trying to Islamize their operations, and they created a group, a team within the bank. It was called Islamic Banking Development Group, and I actually joined that group to provide research support. So that was another interesting element of my career, because until I was in Islamic Development Bank, of course, the bank itself was financing, but it was mainly financing countries. So I had a chance to actually work in the industry and see how what are the issues which arise. While I was working in NCB, I came aware of a position which was Durham University actually had a position. I was not aware of it. Actually, Dr. Mehmet Al-Sutai, he was in Durham, and I had met him at, I think, one of the conferences, probably the 4th International Conference on Islamic Economics and Finance in Loughborough, and I knew him, and actually he informed me about it. I always wanted to go back to academia, mainly to continue with the research. And I think one of the things which I missed in academia, I mean, in working in a commercial bank, was the freedom to do research on topics which interest you. So I took that opportunity, I applied, and Alhamdulillah, they selected me to take this post. Just to give you a brief background, my post was funded by Sharjah's Amir, and that's why I was appointed as a Sharjah chair in Islamic law and finance. And the objective of my hiring was to actually open up a master's program at Durham University. And I joined Durham in 2008, and in 2009 we launched the master's MSc in Islamic finance.
Oh, mashallah. And then recently, 2022, you've got the prize from IsDB, right, for your impactful achievement in Islamic economics, for your contribution to research, right, in Islamic economics and finance. What does it mean to you personally?
Well, actually, I'm really honored to have chosen for this award. It means a lot to me in a sense that my work has been recognized, but it also adds a responsibility to continue the work. I think one of the things which have changed in the IsDB Prize is they are, in the past, I think they were just looking at the contribution to knowledge of Islamic economics and finance, and they changed this criteria to having impactful research. And while I was working at Durham University, I had the chance to work with different international organizations as a consultant. And while working with them, I produced a lot of applied research and policy-oriented research for these organizations. The organizations include, for example, United Nations, COMSEC, IFSB, Islamic Development Bank, among others. And I think these applied research, policy-oriented research, which had some impact on the policy to develop the industry, to think of the infrastructure needed to develop Islamic finance, looking at infrastructure finance from an Islamic perspective, and more importantly, the role of Islamic finance in SDGs. I think those were recognized by the awarding committee, and Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. I mean, congratulations for that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Right, so let's talk a little bit about SDGs, bro. We'll talk about Islamic finance later, of course. What is your take on the progress towards the achievement of SDGs? It's been some times here, right, since 2015, and we are moving towards the 2030, which is the target of the whole lots of SDGs there. What do you take on the progress of it?
I think, SDGs, they succeeded the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. And compared to the MDGs, the SDGs are much ambitious, and they're very broad, and includes, in the MDG, focus was on development growth. It was mainly related to people. But I think one of the key differences in SDGs is that it also includes the environment. And also MDGs were targeted more towards the developing countries, but SDGs include all the countries of the world. So that is a qualitative change, and because of that, it's very ambitious. I think most countries were progressing well. I mean, there were differences in performance of different countries until 2019, before COVID hit. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I think a lot of the progress has stopped, and actually in some cases gone back. So post-COVID era now, I think the recent SDG reports, which come out every year, the latest one, 2023, is in some ways assessing, because now we are in the mid point of the SDGs,
Yes.
because started in 2015 and will 2030, so we're basically in the midpoint. And the assessment is unfortunately bleak that most of the countries are behind in terms of achieving the SDGs, and I'm talking also about the developed countries.
Yes.
But relatively speaking, the developing countries are even more behind. So in terms of the progress, the COVID was definitely in some ways responsible to retard the progress. Which means that the remaining 7.5 years which we have, there has to be a lot more efforts and investments to achieve these goals, because otherwise it will be very difficult to achieve the goals.
Like you mentioned that there is a heterogeneity across countries in terms of achieving these SDGs, right? Of course, we know that developed countries versus developing countries are there, but do you see any other factors affecting this?
I think if we look at the performance, this SDG report, and also I think a lot of these other organizations, they come up with the indicators. We see that in terms of performance, the Europe probably is the best, then North America, then we can say Asia, and then Asia and Latin America would be at the second category, and then Africa is in the third category. So I think it is the African countries as a region, as a global region, which are in some ways most affected in terms of the impact. Now, the factors, of course, are multiple, because when you're talking about SDGs, as you are aware, there are 17 SDGs looking at different elements, and each of these elements have their own logic and factors. In terms of, I think, the SDGs, we can probably think of them in terms, broadly in terms of the human development and the environmental issues. I think in the West, we see the human development part is okay, the environment part is a problem. But in a lot of developing countries, both are problems. And these are very complex issues and problems, and I think we have to think how to, in some ways, improve the quality of human welfare while taking care of the environment. And that would require changes in the way we do things. It is not only about the quantity of investments which is needed, but also needing to change the quality of investment to make it more green, to make it more sustainable. That requires a different kind of thinking.
17 goals are there in SDGs, right? From no hunger, inequality, reducing inequality, decent growth, etc. If I can ask you one goal that you are very much concerned of the achievement of that kind of goal in 2030, what is it? What is the target that you see is very important but still lag behind?
I think I would probably say, broadly speaking, if we look at the human development part, there are of course issues related to no poverty and zero hunger, the first two. In some ways they're linked, and I probably would also bring in the I think it's income inequality, it's number 4 probably. All of these are linked, and I think it's very it is very in some ways difficult to understand that while this immense wealth is being created in the world, I mean, if you look at the history of the world, probably these are the times where most of the wealth is being created. And with this immense creation of wealth, we have people who are not, living in hunger, people living in poverty, and because of the inequalities of the distribution of this wealth and income. So, I mean, it's difficult to talk about one specific goal, but I think when it comes to the human development part, I would say the no poverty, zero hunger, and income inequality as a group probably is a serious concern. And unfortunately, if you look at the indicators, the latest SDG report shows that none of the countries in the latest report, which reflects results from 2022, have achieved the no poverty. They're not on track, not achieved, they're not on track related to no poverty goal. And this includes all the developing countries, developed and developing countries. So as you see, no poverty is also a problem in developed countries. And this probably reflects in some ways the problem we are facing. That even in developed countries, it shows that the target is not on where it should be at this point of time.
So one of the widely mentioned issue about this achievement of SDGs is how we can allocate resource on that, right? One of them, of course, the financing on that. So the so-called sustainable financing. Would you please, enlighten us? How's actually the progress on having really the sustainable financing for these SDGs initiatives?
Yes, I think that's a very important aspect of the SDGs, because when SDGs were launched in 2015, there was some background study done, and actually the world community, they came, this is the Addis Ababa agenda, they met in, before SDGs were launched in November, I think the Addis Ababa meeting was held in June or July. And the focus of that meeting was basically how to fund the SDGs. And it was discussed that to achieve these SDGs, which were very ambitious, with the current level of investments in 2015, the world would face close to $2.5 trillion annually, a gap, financing gap. And somehow that has to be met. Now after COVID, just recently there have been some studies, and I was looking at an OECD study. This gap has increased to $3.9 trillion because the need for investments has increased because of COVID. Now the issue is, how can we look at the financial sector and see how it can contribute to filling this gap. I think there has to be, if you look at the financial assets, again, some reports indicate that the total financial assets globally are $250 trillion close to. So if we think of the financial resources, there seems to be a lot of ample resources. Even if you think of $3 trillion gap, the total financial resources $250 trillion close to. So there are resources out there, but the question is why it is not being deployed in sustainable development, which is required to achieve SDGs. I think there is a need to have a qualitative change in the way financing is done. And the qualitative change means that instead of just looking at the profits, you have to include the other values and matrices. So the so-called, you have to look at profit, people, and also planet.
Right.
So if we do not factor in these criteria into financial decision making, just looking at profits will not help the inequalities which financial sector creates and affects poverty and even hunger on the one hand, and also just looking at the profits will create a financial system which is contributing to greenhouse emissions and climate change. So there has to be this qualitative change in the financing framework, where we move from just looking at profits to also including the people element and the impact on people and also on the environment, which is the planet. So I think the way we can think of sustainable finance is a qualitative change, which when financing decisions are made, also include not only the economic return, but the social impact in terms of impact on people and also impact on environment.
That's very interesting. On that note, we definitely would agree that when we are talking about investors, their main primary, if not the only concern, is somehow profit, right? So that's why, for instance, if you see the initiative of PPP, for instance, PPP is there, but the sectors that are financed and the territories that are financed are pretty much the one that can give the investor profit, right? NPV positive by definition, right? To switch from this profit-only mindset towards the, you say that, more qualitative kind of investment framework, what should it take? I mean, what do we need to do? I'm not so sure. We here, probably government or the international bodies or something like that. Do you have something in mind?
No, I think we see that at least in some regions there is some changes which are happening, which are good and positive. People ultimately investors are people like you and me, who have some surplus and investing. We as investors are becoming more conscious about these things, and we are requiring that our investment must consider these additional factors. And if you look at some developments, and especially in Europe and North America, a significant part of the investors are in some ways asking for their asset managers and wealth managers to actually look into these issues. Now, some of the information I have in terms of the so-called sustainable investments, I think Europe, almost 40 to 45% of the investments are in sustainable investments. So what has happened is now when these portfolio managers, they are investing in companies, they are not only looking at the credit quality and the performance of companies, but they are also requiring them to publish ESG scores, and if they do not fulfill those scores, they will not invest in. So in some ways there is some pressure created on companies to move towards ESG compliant kind of activities, but of course there are issues about greenwashing and those things which needs to be dealt with. I'll just give you an example of BlackRock, which is the largest asset management company. Actually, they control I think more than $10 trillion of assets. Just to give you a perspective, total Islamic banking assets is only 3 trillion. So this one company is managing assets which is 3 times the Islamic financial assets. Now, for the last 5-6 years, the CEO of BlackRock company, I think his name is Larry Page or something. Anyway, because they are one of the largest investors in companies, he issues a letter to CEOs where he's investing. And for the last 5-6 years, he has been saying that you have to include the environmental and social issues, otherwise we will move our money out. So when you have these kind of things, the investors putting pressure on companies, I think that's probably one of the ways in which we can move. But these are some initial things which are happening. So hopefully, with more investment, pressure from the investors on companies, we will move to a more sustainable world. Hopefully, it will take some time. Now, I'm not sure. Well, as I said, this is happening in Europe and North America. I'm not sure if we have similar things happening in the developing world. But I think unless we have this qualitative change, it will be very difficult to think of a world where people live, this shared prosperity, and also issues related to the climate are taken care of.
Indeed, the role of institutional investors in that sense is very much important. And some also call for more involvement of philanthropy on this sustainable finance, in the so-called blended finance, when you have not only government and private, but also philanthropy actually there. Do you see merit on this in terms of course, reality and implementation?
Yeah, I think if you look at the philanthropy sector, it is pretty large. And of course, a lot of philanthropy is already doing social work on their own. Most of the philanthropy are created, otherwise they don't qualify to be non-profits or philanthropic organizations. So the contribution to a lot of social issues are already there. Now the question is whether we can blend philanthropy and commercial finance to create impact. I think there may be some areas where they can be blended and to create synergies. And I think conceptually one area I can think of where they can be blended is commercial finance sometimes does not want to go into certain areas because it does not make economic sense. It's too risky, the returns are not very high. Because philanthropy, of course, have their funds, but they are limited, whereas the financial sector have a lot of funds. These are the areas where we can bring in philanthropy to, in some ways, address those fears of the economic concerns and use the commercial funds to create a higher impact. For example, if we think of Islamic or financial sector, their contribution to microfinance, it is very, very small, we know that. But if we bring in philanthropy and they can provide guarantees, for example, some sort of guarantees that if there's a non-repayment, they will cover it, or then what will happen is this will encourage the financial system to go and do microfinance. Similarly, because microfinance is risky, they have to charge the micro enterprises higher rates of return, because of the risk premium. Again, the philanthropic sector can come in and subsidize some of these returns so that it's not too burdensome on the micro enterprises. So there are some areas where I think we can combine philanthropy and commercial sector and create synergies which can promote, I think, development and induce the commercial sector to go into sectors where they are not going because of their economic mindset.
Sure. We'll talk later about more about how Islamic finance can actually contribute in accelerating the SDGs. But thank you very much for this. Lots of insight that you give to us. So thank you for listening to our podcast. In the next podcast, you can actually also see how we talk about the role of Islamic finance in accelerating the achievement of SDGs. See you soon.